Hey, this is StarCraft 2 History, Part 24, and this time I'm going to talk about the fourth generation champions. Arguably, in my opinion, the last generation of champions, because everybody else from this point onwards doesn't necessarily fall into the same category as the previous generations of champions. So, for instance, in 2015, you're going to get a bunch of guys like Beal, Dream, and Dark, who are, in my opinion, all Kongs. And then after that, you're gonna get in the modern era guys like Dark, Stats, like pretty good players become champions, but aren't like completely new to the top level. So basically, if you looked at the way the pattern works out in StarCraft two, some certain players like they rise up and then they dominate a certain period of time and they like create the era, so to speak. So the first generation was MVP, Nesty, MC. The second generation, in my opinion, was MMA, Marine King, Dongwei Gu. The third generation, Innovation, and Sulky. And this generation is going to be the most dominant one because in every other generation I spoke about, except for MVP, every one of those players falls off partway through the year, either very early on or a little bit longer. In like the case of like maybe MC, right? Like basically like only MVP and MC like stay relevant for a long period of time, and only MVP like is truly dominant in the way these guys I'm going to be talking about are, and they are Zest and soO. And now the first question you're going to ask is like soO, but isn't that guy with all the second places? Why are you putting him in a video called the Generation of Champions when he isn't a champion, right? And this is going to be a very complicated subject, but in my opinion, I think he deserves. Well, he doesn't deserve to be called champion. Certainly, he didn't win anything until Keswick Cup the following year, but he is certainly the most important player in StarCraft 2 history from 2014 onwards, and certainly the second most important player in all of 2014 by a long shot. And that's and then first in my opinion is Zest, second is soO. And these two guys are basically the elephant in the room given true form, as in they're both players that didn't necessarily have immediate immediate upswings when they transferred over from Brood War to StarCraft 2, but they were, well, actually Zest wasn't on the rise, but soO certainly was on the rise of Brood War, so I think he could have definitely made something happen, especially because he had like a top 4 in one of the last, I believe it was OSL, in one of the last OSLs in Brood War, so I think he was definitely on the rise. But for both of them, they were players who are going to define this era of StarCraft 2, and unlike the previous generations, excluding MVP, excluding maybe MC, they are going to define almost the entire year of StarCraft. And if you want to know more about Zest, I'd say just go watch the video I did with Ollie about Zest's entire career. It's like a retrospective of almost every match he played, and almost every great run he ever played on LAN anyway. But basically, Zest does Zest takes the formula of Rain in a sense and takes it a step further. And what I mean by that is like Rain was all about that defensive style macro, and Zest comes in and Zest realizes something. Zest realizes that's just Rain's preference. That's literally just Rain's preference. It's not necessarily the theoretical best way to play. That's just the way Rain loves to play. And so Zest, like, he takes that kind of style. He has like the same like defensive. He has like the same like execution, same refinement of builds. But unlike Rain, he's willing to go on the attack. He's much more willing to like play the build order game, play the refinement game, play the decision making game in a sense. And basically he becomes one of the best like decision makers in StarCraft 2, and that's a testament to that is the fact that he becomes like the ultimate PvP master. And in my opinion, no PvP player has ever reached the heights Zest does in this year. I don't care what era you come from, what player you set up with. Zest in this year was the best PvP we have ever seen throughout the entirety of StarCraft 2, and I think we will ever see in StarCraft 2, in my honest opinion at this point. Basically beats everybody. His PVC was also immaculate. His only weakness was PVT, and there's only two guys. Like there's only like a few guys that could beat him. Like it, obviously, Kier did it. Maru certainly was like a huge problem for Zest because he basically forces Zest into a mechanical game where that's Zest's greatest weakness. And of course, there's Tasia, the only guy who can legitimately outplay Zest in the decision-making game. So that's Zest in a nutshell. And Zest goes on, and and his biggest rival for this year is going to be soO. And now soO is a guy who is hilariously underrated. And what I mean by that is he was hilariously underrated at the time just because, I'll go ahead and say it, I think StarCraft 2 casual fans or maybe even the hardcore fans are like weirdly vain or weirdly like superficial. I don't really know how to say it, but basically a lot of them like look at the looks and they're like, oh man, I love the way CJ Hero smiles. I'm gonna root for that guy. Or like, oh man, Rain, he's so handsome. I'm gonna root for that guy. Or like Zest, oh man, he took off his coat. Look at those muscles. I'm gonna root for that guy. soO obviously wasn't like that much of a pretty boy, and unlike Life, he didn't have that exceptional like in-game excitement factor going for him, where like he was super aggressive, super crazy all the time. And so a lot of people really underrated like soO the entire year, and this gets fucking crazy because all right, soO had already made a GSL finals at the end of 2013 against Deer, but people wrote it off because soO went to the WCS season finals and didn't do well there. It was his first international LAN. Like, no matter what people say, that's actually a different sort of environment from a GSL, even though I agree GSL should be considered the more prestigious and the higher rated tournament. That has its own set of challenges to it. And it's also why, despite like plenty of players having as many chances as somebody like Tasia, they've never matched Tasia's incredible consistency just because he was so good at that style of tournament. Now, basically what soO does is soO is going to force the entire world by the end of this year to recognize him through pure excellence. And that is an incredible feat in and of itself. But not only is it going to be through pure excellence, it's going to be through the fact that he is going to become the greatest Kong StarCraft 2, any StarCraft will ever see. He has already surpassed, in my opinion, Hong Jing-ho, Yellow, the man who originated the term Kong. So basically, they play it out in GSL's Season 1 finals. They go through the bracket. Let's see here. Zest beats a pretty stacked group. Actually, beats Trap, and Leenock wasn't that great by that time. He goes into the group of death, beats Sulky, loses to Maru, beats Sulky again to get out. Loses to Maru, beats Sulky, and then beats Deer to get out. So he basically beats the current like best Protoss, then moves on to beat SOS Rain, and then meets soO in the finals. As for soO didn't have like as crazy of a run. He beats SOS in the first group. Goes on to beats let's see here, Trap and Byung. Byung is somebody I'm going to talk about very much. Best way to describe him is he is a pro league sniper. He had a bunch of odd specific cheesy builds on certain maps in the pro league, and he was used for those. Turns out he was also a match fixer, but he turned himself in, and it's always weird to know. I don't really know if he turned himself in because of guilt or because he was going to get somebody's going to rat him out anyway. But either way, he's basically disappeared from the scene. Doesn't matter anymore. And unlike Life, nobody's going to cry at the passing of his like StarCraft 2 career. So basically, soO has this fucking crazy run. Basically beats Parting in the playoffs. Now Parting, like I said, doesn't have great PvZ. He only has great micro, and so he couldn't out micro soO. soO wins. Then he plays Life, and like I said in a previous episode, Life was like on the return. Life was in really good form. Looked to potentially be the best Zerg player. soO beats him 4-3, and this actually starts a different conversation about soO that's true to this day. I believe soO is the best Zerg vs Zerg player to have ever touched the game. More so than Life, more so than ST, more so than Dark, more so than anybody you want to put up against him. I'll take soO every single time. And so Zest and soO happen. Zest versus soO happens, and this is, in my opinion, among all the GSL finals, this is the finals where, in retrospect, if you look at it, you would think this is the one where soO is the most likely to lose because Deer doesn't go on to do great things. Like, he basically falls off. Classic, great player, but not as great as Zest was. Innovation, yeah, he was great at that time, but he'd fall off. Basically, it was like a meta thing. Like a bunch of the reasons as to why, but basically, among all the players he beats, like historically speaking, Zest is probably the greatest at that point in his prime. But this is the one where he's most likely to win. He should have won, in my opinion. But he he basically throws. And this starts this weird conversation. It starts this weird, like, thing, basically. That's going to happen in my mind. It doesn't happen in anybody else's mind. It's going to happen in my mind, where soO is going to start making me question what it means to be the greatest, what it means to be the best. Because much like Tasia, he's going to do something exceptional as time goes on in StarCraft 2. And that's what it's going to be, is he's going to break every GSL record ever done, but he's never going to win the GSL. And so that's a very complicated subject, and I'll talk about it later when I actually do a StarCraft 2 history thing about soO himself. Going on, they play in the Global Championship, the two of them, and they meet in the semifinals. Zest versus soO again. Another great series, but Zest edges it out again, 3-2. soO could have won this one too, but it's pretty clear at this point, like, Zest has, like, enough of an edge when it comes to the decision making, when it comes to the execution of their builds, when it comes to the matchup of their minds, that Zest should be ahead most of the time when they play each other out. And then you go into the Season 2 GSL. Basically, both of them make it, I believe, to the playoffs. Zest is favored to win it again. And he does pretty well, actually. Let's see here. He gets to the playoffs, and in order to get there, he has to be Innovation and Sulky, and then he loses to True. True was a very cheesy Zerg player. As for soO is a very good player, but what ends up happening is nobody really, like, rates soO as highly as I did at the time, and I don't really know why. I think the fans were very vain, or very superficial in the way they looked at Korean players. Like, either they had to be funny, or they had to be charismatic, or they had to be good looking in order for them to latch on to a Korean player. And so nobody really latched on to soO except for me, because I thought, oh my fucking god, this guy is like, this guy is like changing something. There's like, because he was so solid, like, he was basically changing something about the way the game was being played. And I don't realize this until I get into Season 3, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But basically, soO makes it through. Makes it through. He beats Ragnarok. He also loses to True, funnily enough, in the round of 32, and then he beats Trap to get out. In the group stages, he loses to Classic, and then he beats CJ Hero, and he beats Party to get out. So that's a nice little foreshadowing of what's about to happen, because I actually saw that game multiple times. I saw it like 3 or 4 times, the soO versus Classic matchup, before writing the preview of soO versus Classic. And then I made this strange prediction that somebody tried to call me out on, where I basically completely reversed the win rate percentages in prediction. So basically, what that means is when you go to the maps at the time and you look at the win percentages on TLPD, basically every Zerg favorite matchup, I put every Zerg, like every map that had a Zerg favored chance to win, I put Classic, and every Protoss favored percent chance to win, I put soO. And the reason is because I thought, like, Classic was going to use builds on these Zerg favored maps that were going to directly counter against soO rather than actually play a straight up matchup. Because here's the thing about Classic is I actually believe, like, he is the closest player you're going to think of as Classic. This is going to be a strange tangent, but basically, if you think of Dota 2, he might be Fear. If you think of Overwatch, he might be Libero. And what I mean by that is this guy has a lot of tools in his set, a lot of tools in his kit, and he may not be the best at any single one, but break it down this way: micro, macro, execution, build orders, preparation. Is there anything else? strategy, tactics, basically the positioning. Put all these 8 categories down, and this is what I did. Basically, I put all these 8 categories down because at this time, basically, I'll get back to this in a later video, but basically Protoss was on the rise a lot. And I put all these 8 categories down, and then I started rating each of these players, each of these great Protoss players. So I'm talking about Parting, CJ Hero, Classic, Deer, Zest, even Stork, because like Stork was pretty good at this time, SOS, like Rain, like a bunch of these guys, all in there. Like Trap actually was very good in his own way. I put them all in there, and what ended up happening was Classic was in the top 3, or it was in the top 3 for every single category. He wasn't the best, but he's in the top 3. Basically, in my opinion, Classic had every tool, and in my opinion, he was going to outthink soO in the finals, and that's basically what's going to happen. Is soO goes on to beat soO and True, and like soO versus soO is an important matchup because soO always beat the shit out of soO. Like soO is actually underrated for this year. Basically, soO is a great Zerg. He is, in my opinion, like the second best Zerg throughout the entire year until life wakes the fuck up at the end. But before that, soO is basically one of the best, and he could have actually made a GSL finals if he hadn't run into soO so many times, or soO here at least. Anyway, and then as for Classic beats Paralyze. Paralyze wasn't that good. He was just good for this season. He beats Maru. That's a pretty fucking good matchup in series because everybody knows Maru was fucking great against Blink era, much like Tasia, unlike Innovation. And like I said, you go into the finals, and this is like one of the ones where somebody tried to call me out and say, "What the fuck are you thinking? You went against every win percent on every map." Turns out I was right. Turns out I was almost right. Basically, I predicted 4-3 for soO, but what ends up happening is soO collapses much earlier on than I expect, and Classic wins it out 4-2. And now, soO at this point has 3 GSL finals, 3 GSL final losses. And even at this point, nobody's talking about soO the way I'm thinking about soO. Like, oh my fucking god, this guy's a fucking legend already. In my opinion, he was already a fucking legend. Because if you think about it, not many people actually think about StarCraft 2, its history, and the moment at the same time like I do, I guess. I'm not really sure. But anyway, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking in my head, what the fuck? This is sacred fucking territory, basically. Think about it. In all of StarCraft 2 history, there's only been one player who has ever made consecutive GSL finals. His name was MVP. soO had already surpassed that. soO was fucking insane. Even though he didn't win them, that's fucking insane in my opinion. Especially because when you look at the history of the OSLs, the history of the MSLs, the history of the GSLs, there is very rarely a second place runner-up who is going to show up the next season and do second place runner-up again, because the loss of that finals is so soul-shattering to so many of them that you can't get back up immediately. Maybe some of them can get back up later again. You have Yellow, you have Stork, you have a few of the others, but Fantasy famously lost 2 OSL finals at the end. But basically, I was thinking in my mind, oh my fucking god, soO is the real deal. Like soO is here to stay. And so I started studying soO. And when you start studying soO, you realize something very strange. Basically, the way I actually think of soO is I think he is the true heir to Nest-T. And basically, he for whatever reason comes up with the very similar idea to what Nest-T does, where what he does is he gets a lot of economy early on, and then he uses that economy and he parlays that into his mechanical skill. And this is what Nest-T try to do. Basically, if you want proof of Nest-T's thinking, you have to find the documentary of Nest-T and Hong Jing-ho, that's Yellow, when they briefly had Yellow try to play StarCraft 2 for like a GSL qualifiers. And when you listen to Nest-T lecture Yellow, he is always very insistent on a few things. One of them is you must never miss an inject. You must never miss an inject. And the reason he says this is because that is your literal limiting factor when you're producing units or producing drones. And this is something that he understood on a very intrinsic level. And this is something soO also understands. But unlike the rest of the Zergs, he is almost always going to hit them. And this is something that's always been completely underrated. But basically, if you want, this is what I did. Go back through 2011 all the way to the modern age, and look at every other Zerg except for soO, and specifically look at their injects during the periods of 3 to 4 hatch onwards. And you have to look specifically for this type of composition. You have to look for Muta-Ling Baneling composition, or Roach Hydra Corruptor, or something of those variants. Basically, the variants where you trade off a lot, because this doesn't work obviously for Stefano's Brutal Infestor or the Swarm Host, because actually the strategic tactical decision is actually you have to forego injects in those cases, because you're basically just wasting APM, you're wasting focus, you're wasting attention, because in those cases you're basically trying to win the fight without refilling. But in the cases of you have to refill the units, look at the injects, because what's going to happen in these specific games is whether or not Terrans or Protoss realized it, they did it anyway. It was basically they try to out multitask the Zerg. They try to put a lot of pressure, and the whole point of doing that obviously is to do damage economically, but there's a side effect, and that side effect is because so much shit is happening, you deprioritize the inject. But soO never lets up. No matter how much shit is going down, soO will always hit that thing. It's actually incredible. And not only does he do that, he actually has a much better sense of timing than Nesty. I guess I'll put it that way. Timing than Nesty, because Nesty was obviously a guy who tried to do that really weird, not weird, but it was standard back then, but basically he was very similar to Idra in the sense like they both thought it's much better to like bank up 1,000, like basically 1,000 minerals, 1,000 gas, make 10 meters at once, and then you instantly get that map control. soO didn't think like that. soO thought in his head, yeah, maybe you could do that. But what happens is during that time period, there's a huge opening, or not huge, but there's a big enough opening for Terrans to exploit, or maybe in the case of Protoss, like Roaches and Hydras or whatever it was they were using. Like I said, it has to be an expendable unit composition. And so you look at that and he thinks to himself, okay, is there a way for me to even this out gradually evenly by keel? And basically, like Lichter from Team Liquid, he's the editor there. He basically points out what soO does is he makes 1 or 2 mutas, and then he slowly builds up the ball instead of making 1,000 at a time, 10 at a time instantly. And because of that, he has way more forces on the ground, so he can always overwhelm anything that's coming at him. And so all of a sudden, the damage that the Terrans think they're going to inflict doesn't happen. And so he just starts rolling harder and harder and harder. And then you hit the early late game that was basically Nesty's specialty with the Muta-Ling Baneling. And soO was like even way better at it than Nesty ever was. Because by this point, like basically in Nesty's day, there's only a few Terrans that could like truly micro at that level. During this day, fucking every Terran knows how to do it, especially off creep. Look at soO's TVZs. He routinely goes off creep. He routinely wins because he has so much inject, because he is using such incredible refined mechanics, because he's understanding the economy. That's what's going to destroy every fucking player he's going to run into. It's actually amazing. It's actually why I think he has. It's why, like, in the case of specifically soO, because I know for certain soO never saw any Nesty games. Like, basically, Nesty's already out by the time soO comes into the fucking picture, and Nesty's style's already out, and then Nesty goes to WCSNA, so there's almost certainly no way there's any kind of cross-pollination there. But even if there was, soO took the idea and, like, he maxed it out to a point, like, nobody, like if you're talking about refinement, I actually think is even better than, like, what Innovation does with Terran, with the standard builds, because soO does it with this, like, kind of outdated style nobody thinks about anymore, but he does it in such an elegant way that basically everybody does it now. It's so good, right? And so that's basically what's gonna happen. What's gonna happen, because going to the 3rd season, soO, like I said, still underrated, still underappreciated by the vast majority of the StarCraft community. basically, there's also very good reasons because at this point, like Zest, obviously a pretty boy, but Flash is coming to the picture, and this is going to be one of Flash's best peaks as a StarCraft 2 player, and obviously Flash, very beloved figure, all-time greatest Brood War player. And so everybody's thinking in their minds, oh man, Flash, he's going to destroy the world, he's going to be the best. And fair play to Flash, like this, among all the different times, even during this time I thought he was always overhyped, but this is like the closest time where I thought the hype was justified, basically. So basically what Flash does is he like dominates Pro League. Like he's always been very good at Pro League, even in StarCraft 2 for a majority of the time. Then you go into the GSL Season 3 and he destroys Dark and he destroys Solar. Both of them are very good Zergs. Like we all know this for certain now, but they were both very good Zergs even back then. Like I feel like Dark, even though he wasn't a championship level caliber player yet, he had certainly shown a lot of skill, enough so to make it a notable win. And then Flash goes on to IE in Toronto, wins it, and then comes back, and everybody is like out of their goddamn minds. They're saying crazy shit like Flash is going to be the greatest of all time. The prophecy is fulfilled. Flash is going to win. I even wrote something like there hasn't been a return this long awaited since Jesus. Shout out to Rakim. But basically, that's the recollection. That's the atmosphere at the time about Flash. And so obviously everybody's talking about Flash, but nobody's talking about soO. And I'm just thinking in my head, soO's gonna fucking destroy this dude. You guys don't know, because I was almost certain soO was going to destroy them. And they meet up, and actually this is actually one of the funniest matches to me, just because it goes out exactly like I said. soO fucking dominates Flash. He plays Flash's style, basically like this macro style, and like fucking destroys him. Like one of them, like he lets Flash get 30 drones up on him. He still destroys fucking Flash. It's absolutely amazing. And I was like, Jesus Christ, soO, you're so fucking good. You're so fucking good. And of course, obviously this entire video is about soO. It's also about Zest, and Zest, like I said, he isn't he isn't chewing bubblegum either, right? So basically, Zest goes through his groups as well, and he's not as dominant, like I said. Basically, he beats Sulky twice, and Sulky, if you saw my video, is basically burned out by this point. He loses to Kier, but he still makes it to the playoffs, and his playoffs are pretty good. Basically, he beats Rain, and Rain was one of the best PvP players, still is. And then soO beats Stats, and then the two of them meet. And then this is the brilliant moment for soO. Basically, Zest has his number in the macro games and in typical layouts. Basically, soO specifically prepares for Zest, and their matchup at Global Championship and at the previous GSL Finals makes soO understand that you have to play Zest a bit differently than the others. You cannot walk down the same roads that Zest understands. At least not unless you're Tasia, because only Tasia has proven he can do it. And so soO does this. soO comes up with a bunch of builds, and I believe actually he gives credit to Cats for helping him with these like ridiculous builds like proxy hatches and whatnot. Basically destroys Zest. Well, not destroys, but outdoes Zest, beats Zest 4-3, and then you think surely this time soO is going to win the GSL Finals. But then something happens along the way. He goes to DreamHack Stockholm, and to put it into perspective, by this point soO has gone to 3 GSL Finals. He is going to be in the finals of the 4th GSL, and soO is so underappreciated at this time. They don't even put him on the main stage of DreamHack. They don't even give him like an interview until he gets to the fucking finals, basically, as far as I remember. And so he goes to the finals, and it's like easy peasy all the way through. He even beats like Classic through his run, which is actually pretty funny, just because it kind of shows like he could have beaten Classic in that GSL Finals too, except soO in finals. And so he plays against Solar, and this is the point where I know for certain soO is a Kong, because he plays against Solar, and this should be a very easy matchup. Like I said, soO, greatest of all time, Zerg player. Specifically against Solar, huge dominating streak, loses 3-0 to Solar for no apparent reason that I can see. And then like on Twitter, he basically goes, it's better he basically goes, it's better to fail than to get second. I was like, oh, fucking Jesus Christ. And basically goes to GSL Finals, gets rinsed out by Innovation. Pretty sad result. But basically, what makes this generation of champions so special is, like I said, both Zest and soO last out throughout the entire year. And both of them have like incredible careers, basically, going onwards. And let's see, there's one more thing. Oh yeah, basically Zest goes on and does a bunch of other things. He wins Caspa Cup. He gets second in Toronto, gets top 4 in Hot 6 Cup. Basically, this is like the strongest generation of champions outside of like MVP, basically. Even then, I actually think Zest's 1 year here, his dominance is probably better than MVP's, just if you consider the strength of the era, maybe. Like, there's actually a few other things that go in MVP's favor, though, is like the rigor of the schedule, the fact that it's a new game, and also the fact like Zest didn't truly get over his TVP the way MVP got over his TVP. So it's arguable, certainly. But I actually feel like this is one of the most dominating, probably the second most dominating period of any single player. The most dominating, I have to give it to Life, and that's going to be its own little video. As for soO basically does the impossible. He gets to 4 GSL finals and basically goes into territory no other player will ever reach ever again. 4 consecutive GSL finals. Most people can't even get into fucking 1. Jesus Christ. Anyway, that's it for the Generation of Champions. And basically the tale of Zest and soO is in many ways the tale of 2014 and what's to come at BlizzCon 2014, because there's, even though I'm talking about the Generation of Champions, there's actually, like I said, 2 prodigies that are going to rise above them that actually break the mold, and Tasia and Life are going to prove that. All right, see you guys later.